Hello everybody, welcome back to the Lucy Superfox show. My name is Lucy Superfox and this is my podcast and channel. So in this episode, I'm going to share some stories with you. I feel like maybe it's time to tell the stories that I haven't told, and I feel like it's time to dig into what really happened with my healing journey. And I think sharing some of these things might allow you to feel seen and heard and like you're not going crazy. And I know it's time to share these stories because every single time I have a one-to-one coaching call with potential clients, or I have a discovery call, or I meet with somebody in real life, or I get chatting to them in one of the group programs that I run, the feedback I always get is, God, I feel so seen. You're so relatable. Everything you say just resonates on a whole new level. And so I know that I'm letting these people in this one-to-one capacity inside my coaching programs, inside those containers, but maybe there's room and there's time to share with you the stories that I haven't. That's what I thought I would share with you in this week's episode. And I know that naturally I'm a teacher person, like I love to teach, I love to share what I know, I'm very opinionated and very passionate. And I think sometimes I can lose sight of the thing that people actually want to know is the stories, is the what really happened, is how did it happen for me, is what did I do, rather than necessarily what I know needs to happen next for you. So let's dive into it. So my healing journey, looking back, and I say it really started in 2021, but if I look back, it kind of started in 2019. So 2019 was the year that I officially separated and divorced from my ex-husband. Divorce started that year. And I think that was the first year that I went into therapy. Now, I'd had counselling before. I'd done a lot of personal development. I was a trained life coach. I'd done my advanced coaching qualifications, I had all the reasons to have my shit together. But after the divorce, even though I had found love with my now husband and was in a great place in terms of knew what I wanted, my business was thriving, I had a beautiful home, I'd met my now husband, everything was going good. There was just this feeling that something was missing. And that's really how it started for me. It was this feeling that something was missing, that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much money I made, no matter what I created, there was just this feeling of emptiness. And that's really when I was like, okay, there's something deeper going on. There's something bigger here. I need to get some help. And so that's when I reached out to a therapist. Now, I actually Googled, I just Googled a local therapist because at the time in 2019, which looking back now is, 6 years ago, but looking back, you didn't see therapists on Zoom, you saw therapists in person. And so I Googled someone who was close to me. Now, my therapist, and anyone that I've referred to my therapist will know, she is an incredible woman. And I feel very blessed to have had the time to work with her, to have been privileged to have discovered her on my universal journey. But that work started with her in 2019. And I will get her on the podcast at some point. We're no longer kind of practicing patient client. So we can do that. But what I think she would say is that I was a hard nut to crack. I was like, everything's fine with this, and this, but this is the thing that needs to change. And she'd be like, so your childhood? And I'd be like, we're not fucking talking about my childhood. My childhood is absolutely fine. It was great. My parents love me. Let's move on. And I remember being about 4 or 5 months in and she said something and I was like, oh yeah. So when I was a kid and I was like, damn it. And that was really the point that I kind of recognized that if I was going to allow myself to really feel things, if I was going to allow myself to like massively grow an epic business and to feel into the joy, I was also going to have to feel the disappointment, and I was going to have to address this feeling of emptiness. And in this therapy, it allowed me not just to reframe the stuff in my head, but it allowed me to start feeling things I hadn't felt for years. And that came with both the good and the bad, right? Because feeling isn't all one way. Feeling isn't all positive and joyful. Sometimes feeling is shit. And that's kind of how it rolled for me. And so I carried on through therapy. I achieved some massive business goals in 2020. But what happened is because the goals came with such high pressure and an immense amount of stress that my nervous system immediately went into shutdown. Now, I didn't recognize it at the time. I just thought I was knackered. But looking back, I was really sick really quickly. I was really deeply unhappy. I mean, we were in lockdown at the time as well. I was really feeling the cabin fever. I was obsessed with being able to go and see people in my business and getting out and control. And and the only way to describe it is neurotic. Now, don't get me wrong, I was a little bit neurotic when I went into this process. I've always had these traits of like wanting to be in control and wanting to be the person who knew everything when it was happening and like had to be first and I had to be best. And these are trauma traits, which I've talked about at length, but I will talk about over the coming episodes. But what I know for sure is that I went into a kind of nervous system breakdown in kind of June 2020. I just wasn't aware of it. And so some of the signs and symptoms that was happening were this feeling of constant anxiety. This is where I was kind of leaning into this, I'll have an alcoholic drink, it'll help me relax. It's just I've had a stressful time. We're just in a stressful situation. You know, lots of other people were going through lockdown with way more stressful things going on than I was. You know, I was in a great privileged position financially, my business was going well. Who did I have the right to be someone who was down and, you know, stressed and worried? Super anxious, wanted to get everything right. And honestly, my nervous system was just fried. But I didn't witness that. I just thought I needed a holiday, or I just thought I needed to hit another business goal, or I just thought I needed to make more money. And I was always looking on the outside of myself for the answers. And I have no idea how my therapist didn't just sit me down and give me a, you know, I mean, obviously we're on FaceTime at this point, but I don't know how she didn't just sit me down and be like, yo, because that's what I would be like. Yo, let's sort this out. Anyway, I saw her kind of on and off, by on and off, I mean at least twice a month for what proceeded to be the next 3 years. And those signs got worse. So the anxiety got worse. I developed some attachment trauma around my now husband. I really considered myself a very emotionally independent woman, and I became very codependent. And when he went away for a trip, I basically, if you know anything about attachment styles, it really became obvious to me that I'd gone into a very anxious, avoidant attachment style where I was really anxious the whole time he was away, and then punished him for it, and then just avoided contact and connection with him. And this was really a sign to me that there was still so many wounds that have been left unhealed. And I think when we look at behaviours like that, we think, oh, it's just because I've been hurt in the past, or it's just because I had a dickhead of an ex-boyfriend, not, oh look, there's a bigger gaping wound there that I haven't addressed that's affecting me everywhere. We look at it and we put things in boxes. So like we put, you know, issues with our relationship into, oh, that's just a love issue I need to fix. Or issues with money, we go, oh, well, I just need to fix this issue with money. And actually that's what I was doing. I was basically compartmentalizing and piecemealing these areas of my life and saying, well, that needs to be fixed because that's to do with my body, so I need to go on another gut protocol. Or this needs to be fixed in my relationship because we need to build more trust and he needs to communicate more. And so that was one of the other signs, was codependency was a big one. The kind of anxious attachment style, the me trying to fix things. So lots of problems occurring all the time and me fixing them. That was definitely a sign. 3, this constant chronic underlying anxiety of never being done, never enough, and this kind of needing a drink to relax. It was the only way I could switch off. That was another one. But really when it started to show up for me in a massive way was when my emotions started to control me. And as somebody who's always very much had her shit together, I would consider myself a very considered woman. You know, I worked in corporate for a long time. I work with a lot of corporate women. I still deliver workshops for corporates. Like, I have a very corporate persona. You know, corporates like me. I'm kind of a safe bet. You know, yes, of course, I'm loudmouthy and gobby when I want to be, but equally I'm very polished and professional when I want to be too. And I think when I felt like I couldn't be like that, like I couldn't turn these parts of myself on because I was just emotionally irrational. I was having like emotional breakdowns all the time. I was in rage. I was in terror about things that were nothing serious. You know, I remember being absolutely enraged because someone said something to me and I fucking lost it. Now, luckily my husband now is a very compassionate man and knew I wasn't shouting at him. He was just in the room while I was shouting. But I remember just like absolutely losing it about something that had nothing to do with anything. And this is when I started to recognize that there was something deeper going on. But again, I kept blaming things on the outside of myself. I kept thinking, oh, I need to drink less. I kept thinking, oh, I just need to work harder, or I just need to make more money, or I just need this to grow, I just need that to grow. And just like, I kept looking outside of myself thinking the answer was out there because that's what I've been taught. You know, I've been an overachiever and a high performer and an A-type and all the fucking personality types you want to use since I was out the womb, right? And, you know, I was trying not to add teaching points in here, but it's just going to happen, you know. And one of the things that most people underestimate is they say things like, oh my gosh, my daughter's so independent when she's like 18 months old. I'm like, that's not a good thing. When children are independent really, really young, it's not a sign of necessarily their intelligence always. Sometimes it's a sign of the fact they don't trust you to be there for them. Sometimes it's to do with the fact that actually they don't feel secure and they have to fend for themselves. And, you know, I have no way of knowing and reflecting back, and I absolutely love my parents. I want to be really clear about this. I absolutely love my parents. Parents are always doing the best they can with what they know. And when they know better and they understand better, they do better. But what I do know for sure is that from a very young age, maybe from when my sister was born, you know, I was kind of 2 and a bit when she was born, maybe that was the kind of point where I was no longer the sole focus of attention, is that when that happened, I obviously used performance and intelligence and being bright and brainy and being pretty to be the thing where I got approved of. And that's definitely something that was a theme that carried on through my life. In fact, I distinctly remember people saying things like, oh, you were so pretty as a little girl, or you were just so clever. And it's like, okay, but what about my soul? Was I happy? Was I joyful? Did I like my life? You know, and we wonder why we end up in these kind of situations where we feel like we have to be smart, clever, pretty all the time, otherwise we're fucking failing at life. So I had spent my whole life like this, in this kind of overachieving, overperforming, needing to be great, needing to be the best. And that's because that's where safety was for me. You know, I've told this story before, but I remember being at school and they used to, you know, like we used to have spelling tests and they used to mark who was like got the most right, and then after that, and I was always third. I was always third at everything, third in the class every single time, behind two girls, Jenny and Katie, lovely girls, hope they're doing well. If you ever listen to this, wish you well, hope you're doing well. And they were both absolute brain boxes, and I was always third, and I never let that go. It was like it was never enough. And so this never enough mindset started when I was so young. You know, I'm talking primary school here, I'm talking like sub year 5, maybe year 4. You know, this never enough, I'm never good enough, I've got to keep trying, got to work harder, kind of started then. And it wasn't a surprise to me. This showed up with, you know, my body goals. It was never enough. I was never lean enough. I was never fit enough. I was never healthy enough. I was never strong enough. It showed in with money. There was never enough money in the bank account, in the savings account. And this is where kind of like our cycles with money start, right? Is that if we're in the energy of never enough, it starts with us being in that energy. It doesn't start with the money, it starts with the energy always. And so that showed up for me in body, it showed up for me in money, it showed up for me in business, that no matter how hard I worked, there was never enough. It was never enough. And it gets to the point where there's only so fucking hard you can work, right? And there's only so many hours in the day. And a big part of this journey for me has been unlearning the narrative of hard work. Because, you know, from a young school age, it's pushed on us, isn't it? Well, if you work hard and hard work beats talent, and you know, this kind of narrative of like the harder you work, the more successful you'll be. And honestly, now at 37, as someone who spent the last actively the last 4 years in a kind of a healing and real growth era, I haven't made any less money, and I've worked maybe a third of the time. And yes, sure, built momentum in those early years, sure, but actually the work hard narrative is bollocks. And it's bollocks because if you are in the energy of never enough, if you are in the energy of I'm not good enough, if you are in the energy of your trauma and your wounds and you're reliving a vibrational experience of lack and negativity and fear and shame every single day, it will not matter how hard you work, because you are not a vibrational match for wealth, you're not a vibrational match for abundance, you're not a vibrational match for safety, which are all the things that you're probably seeking and craving. And I know this because this has been my life. And so really that kind of some of those symptoms and signs that showed up were the fact that I could no longer be this kind of polished performer. I just couldn't, I had no filter. I was angry, I was, you know, really angry. Like I would get really angry about the stupidest of shit. Like I would lose my temper all the time. And then there was this kind of season where I knew that I probably had ADHD, and I was in massive denial about it, because my experience of ADHD at this time was that if you had ADHD, it was an excuse and a reason not to be successful. And I was mega successful. I've, built a 6-figure business in my first 3 years in business and never earned less than that. I was like, I don't have ADHD because ADHD people are unsuccessful. And I refused to tie myself to the narrative that I could possibly be unsuccessful. What I should have done instead is recognize that some of the most successful people in the world have ADHD. But anyway, I refused to buy into this narrative that I had ADHD for a long time. And I only really accepted it probably at the end of 2021. So quite a long time later. And I only really accepted it because I read an amazing book, I can actually see it, called Scattered Minds by Gabriel Maté, where he talks about ADHD not as a disease, but as a trauma, basically an attachment trauma. And that it develops because of the fact that when we are either in utero or in our early developmental years, when we don't have that connection with the mother, when we don't have that kind of like eye contact, when we're not basically co-regulated and co-connected, we can lead us to look for kind of that sense of safety, that sense of connection outside of that relationship with the mother. And this can lead to that kind of scattered mind, looking everywhere for those feelings, right? There's no actual scientific proof that it's to do with a lack of dopamine or a lack of serotonin. So I think that's why I refused to accept it, because I didn't want to go there. I probably didn't want to look at what was happening underneath that. But that's really when I opened myself up to addressing what needed to come to the surface. And I think when I realized that I wasn't going to move forward whilst I was telling stories about what I wasn't willing to look at, I was like, well, I'm not going to fucking move anywhere, am I? And so I really had to embrace the journey. I was like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes, because I feel like shit. I wake up every day, I'm feeling disconnected, I'm feeling listless. I'm working hard and I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. I'm looking at my life thinking, do I want this? I don't know. Feeling passive about things that used to set my soul on fire. I was feeling empty about things that I built and I created. I was feeling disconnected from people that I loved. I was feeling just down, and I was shoulding myself into everything. I was saying, well, I should do that, and I should do that, and I should do this. And I was putting myself under so much pressure because I'd lost that emotional connection with the things that I actually wanted. And there was no way of finding out even what I wanted. Like, you could have said to me at the time, what is it you want? And I'd have said, don't know. And I didn't. And a client say to me a lot of the time, they're like, well, what happens if I don't know what I want? Like, why don't I know what I want? I'm like, because it's not safe to want anything, because you're so caught up in the narratives of the world, of who you've had to be, of who people have expected you to be, of what you should be, that you don't have a fucking clue who you are. And that's really what the healing journey is figuring out who you are. Because I'll be totally honest, end of 2021, other than knowing that I wanted to buy a house and that I wanted to continue in the industry I was in, like, that's all I knew. And to be with my husband, I was like, that's all I knew. And I was like, I'm going to hang on to these three things. If it means loads of other things need to fall away, if it means my body needs to change, my business needs to change, I will do whatever it takes to not feel this disconnected from my life. And I remember phoning a friend who's a doctor actually and being like, I think I'm depressed. And she asked me a load of questions. She was like, well, based on these questions, she's like, you're not depressed, but you are experiencing a depressive episode. And this is when I spoke to my therapist and said, look, I don't want to use meds because I don't think they're going to help, because I don't think I'm going to allow them to help. Because look, just because depression, there are lots of studies again that depression has nothing to do with serotonin, and that a serotonin uptake inhibitor is not going to help with depression. Depression is caused by brain inflammation, it's caused by massive trauma, it's caused by something called polyvagal theory, which I'll talk about. Like, depression is caused by a lot of things, but the number one thing it's caused by is nervous system dysregulation and a massive trauma spiral. And that's what was happening, is I was in a state of massive dysregulation and a massive trauma spiral. Now, trauma, I think sometimes we hear this word and we think, oh my God, what happened to you? But trauma isn't one event. Trauma is how safe we felt to experience life. And so trauma can be a car accident, sure, but it can also be how safe we felt to be ourselves at school, whether or not we were liked or not, how much attention we got from our parents, how young we were when we first had sex, had a breakup, whether or not we got rejected a lot, and how safe our nervous system felt to handle that. And this is why attachment trauma, so like what you experience as a child, is so connected to this. Because if your parents taught you to co-regulate well, if they helped you understand your feelings, to express your feelings, and then allowed you to experience your feelings, and then helped you regulate from things not outside of you, so not giving you tea and biscuits, not sticking you in front of the telly, but actually allowed you to regulate through their emotional connection with you, that you have a bigger capacity to handle things because your nervous system is more regulated. Now, I obviously went into my life being a highly sensitive person. I'm going to do a whole episode on highly sensitive people, by the way, because it's totally a superpower. But I spent my whole life being highly sensitive, and so I knew I was dysregulated. So when I heard about this concept of nervous system dysregulation, I was like, well, that'll be me. And all that means is that our nervous system is either caught in fight or flight, or it's moved into the freeze and fawn element of our parasympathetic. So we have two parts. We have our sympathetic, which is our react system, and our parasympathetic, which is our relaxed system. And our parasympathetic, we think of it as like, oh, it's the chill area. But the parasympathetic actually has two parts. It has the connected, joy, relaxed vibe, and it also has the freeze and fawn, where we're frozen in time, where we feel shut down, where we feel hopeless, where we feel helpless. And we also have the fight or flight, which is where we feel that constant state of stress and that constant state of anxiety. And if you want to dig more into polyvagal theory, it's written by a guy called Dr. Stephen Porges, and actually I have done a lot of work on it with all my clients. There's lots of resources inside all of my programs with that. But when I first saw polyvagal theory, and maybe we'll just drop a little image of polyvagal theory on the screen now, and I recognized that what was happening is I was flitting between this fight or flight and this freeze and fawn, and I wasn't ever moving into joy and connection because there was dysregulation in my nervous system. My nervous system didn't feel safe. It felt like it was under threat. And like, I said to a client the other day, you can't talk down a saber-toothed tiger. I was trying to talk it down with fucking gratitude and affirmation, as if that's going to do shit, right? When your nervous system on a deep unconscious level is in massive dysregulation, is in fear and terror and anxiety and feels unsafe, no affirmation in the world is going to fix that fucking problem. And no amount of gratitude is going to change your vibrational state from the shame, shutdown and helplessness into hopefulness and joy. Like, that's just bollocks. And that's really trying to sugarcoat, throw a band-aid on a massive, massive wound. And so this is where the healing journey is really, really important, is that had I at that point not chosen to dig in, not been willing to feel, not been willing to look at what was going on with me, I wouldn't be where I am. Because if I tried to carry on sugarcoating it, listening to, affirmations and writing a gratitude list every day, I would be spiritually bypassing. I would be jumping over the things that I was genuinely feeling, not healing them at all. And then I'd be experiencing things probably like weight gain. I'd probably be drinking more. I'd probably be, I'd be getting even more distracted. I'd be sending myself in 5 different directions with my business, because I'd be looking for myself, looking outside of myself again for the answer. But the answer was inside of me. The answer was heal the root cause of my dysregulation. And the root cause of all dysregulation is trauma. Trauma somewhere, whether it's a low-grade chronic trauma like a nagging parent, or an acute trauma like an event that happened in the past. And so I had to allow myself to face up to my emotions. And the emotions I had to face, the 2 for me that came up the most, the first was shame. The shame, and honestly, the way I describe shame is like being suffocated. It's like it kind of starts in this like gnawing anxiety in your gut, and then it reaches up and I feel like it grabs me by the throat, and I can feel myself getting emotional. And that gnawing shame of never being enough, I had lived with that my whole life, and I'd pushed it down my whole life with more achievement. At the next goal, I'll feel good enough. At the next drink, I'll feel good enough. At the next party, I'll feel good enough. With the next award, I'll feel good enough. At the next body weight, I'll feel good enough. And I never fucking did. And I achieved some amazing things, and I never got to enjoy them because I was constantly living in this shame avoidance. Avoid this feeling of shame. I remember saying to my therapist, this emotion is pointless. Why does it exist? If God exists, why the fuck did he make shame? And she said, to remind you not to do things again. So if you're mean to somebody and then they get really upset, you feel shame about that, is to remind you not to do it again. And I was like, but how does shame go so wrong? Why do we not understand? Like, why? That's not the reason I have loads of shame, because I went around upsetting people. Like, why do I have it? She said, because you never felt good enough, because you made things on the outside world. So whether it was mum and dad having an argument, or the teacher not picking me for a part in the play, or the boy not picking you, or whatever it was, you allowed that as a highly sensitive person to mean something about you. And that's not because you're wrong or stupid or got it wrong, you were a child. But what we do is to keep ourselves safe, rather than because again, if you're under 7, you also don't even have really a subconscious mind to figure all this shit out. We just go, oh, it must be me. The way to keep myself safe is to play small, change, be different, blend in. And this is when we start to become that chameleon, or we start to change as people, or we end up down the should path, because in order to avoid that feeling of shame, that feeling of not being good enough, we will do fucking anything, because it is the worst feeling in the world. We'll either numb it out with drugs, alcohol, sex, food, television, procrastination, moaning, blaming, complaining, having 7 kids. Everyone's behaviors are different. We'll do anything we can to either numb it out or to avoid it. And this is where the overachievement, the overperforming, the driving forward comes from, because shame is such an intoxicatingly paralyzing emotion, and being caught in a shame spiral is like being caught in quicksand. So working through my shame was massive. And I remember one of the biggest moments was actually telling my husband that I felt like a crippling failure to him, because he had married this like absolutely, when we got together, I was like on fire, I was dominating, I was crushing it. I was, within a year of being with me, I'd scaled to 6 figures. He was like, fucking hell, who is this woman? And I found myself 3 years later in a hole, sat in a ball on our sofa, just like, I can't do this, about everything. And I just felt such like a crippling failure. And this is why the feeling of failure has nothing to do with what you've actually achieved. It has nothing to do with the money in your bank, it has nothing to do with your body goal. It's a feeling. And this is why we have to address our feelings, because otherwise we think we're going to find a new feeling outside of us, and we're not. So the second emotion I had to really address and really sit with was fear. Was the fear of like all these things I've been catastrophizing my whole life, like thinking that if I did this, then I would, be cancelled, or if I did that, then I might die, or if I did that, then my relationship would end. And like, I would always just catastrophize. And what I realized was that was a safety technique. I did that to make myself feel safe. So by constantly living in fear, I thought that would make me more safe than not thinking about it at all. And what was actually happening was it was creating such a sense of stress, combined with all that shame of that unprocessed emotion of never feeling enough, never feeling good enough. Then you throw onto the top of it this intoxicating feeling of constantly being afraid of never being good enough, whilst also being afraid of everything that happens to us in life. You throw a pandemic in the mix and we're all fucking terrified. And I had to work through that sense of fear. And I'm still working through it. The truth is I'm still working through what that means for me. But fear is something that shows up in the most sneaky of ways. We would say, I'm not afraid of the dark, or I'm not afraid of being successful. Why would I think that? And actually, it's not so much about our conscious fear, it's about fear in our body. It's about what our nervous system perceives as safe. That's what I think fear is for me. And so a big part of my healing journey wasn't just regulating my nervous system and feeling old and unprocessed emotions, but was actually changing what I believed about life and allowing myself to not see life as out to get me, and not seeing life and the world as a dangerous place, and being able to see the world as somewhere that actually you can blossom and grow and have beautiful things. And it's an amazing experience to be alive and live in a vibrational universe. And this is where we can sometimes see people who have gone through that healing journey as these like polypositives, and they're not, but they do have a different perspective. And so this is where, you know, with my clients, one of the things I do is I kind of say to them, and I did this with the consultation call this week, I was like, just stop. I was like, anything that you're shooting yourself into, building your business, going to the gym, cleaning your house, whatever, just stop. Just stop shooting yourself for a whole fucking 5 minutes and give yourself permission to just be. Because when we're shooting ourselves, and I see so many people shaming themselves into a personal development routine, shaming themselves into gratitude, shaming themselves into affirmations, I'm like, if you are making yourself do it, you're not actually grateful, and that defeats the fucking object, right? Because when we shame or manipulate ourselves into anything, we're in the energy of shame and manipulation. We're not in the energy of gratitude. And so this is what I really grasped, was that whilst there was a part of me, and the rebel part of me, we'll call her, who didn't want to fucking do any of those things, who was fucking still angry and still mad. She was more powerful than the version of me that was sat in a shame spiral. And so I let her step forward for a while. I let her decide that we weren't going to do any more personal development, that we were willing to embrace the healing journey and we would go all in. We weren't going to take advice from people who we didn't want to be like, or who had no idea what it was like to be me. We weren't going to take advice from people who hadn't been through a healing journey. People who were what? You know, somebody over there to the left who thinks this is how you're supposed to post on Instagram, or somebody who, you know, has never been through anything difficult in their life telling you that they need to write 10 grateful things a day. Like, that's amazing if that worked for them. But I just decided to stop listening to advice from people who hadn't been where I'd been. And that was one of the most powerful things I've done. And look, you don't have to listen to any of my advice, by the way. But I just knew that the answers were not out there. Like, yes, the teachers were going to show up. Yes, the knowledge was going to show up. Yes, the experiences were going to show up for me. But what I was actually looking for was not outside of me. What I was looking for was to process the old experiences, the old emotions, the painful things, the feelings I hadn't felt, the things I'd pushed down, the things I'd numbed out. That is where I needed to go next. And that is where I went. And so over the next few episodes, you know, in early episodes of this podcast, I talked about some of the modalities I went through in my healing journey, but I'm going to talk you through in the next few episodes some of the healing experiences I went through. I'm going to talk about microdosing mushrooms. I'm going to talk about breath work. I'm going to talk about sound healing. I'm going to talk about meditation. I'm going to talk about therapy. I'm going to talk about, you know, what I've just trained in, which is root cause therapy, and how that can be such a transformational tool for people. And I'm going to be talking about what the roadmap is. So if right now you are at this crossroads and you're like, I feel everything you said, Luz, I'm burnt out, my nervous system's fried, I feel nothing, I'm disconnected from my life, or I'm heading in that direction, or you've related to anything I've said, then I'm going to be giving you an exact roadmap for how to move through this healing journey at your own pace, because that's the truth. Everyone's pace is different. So as we come to the light at the end of the tunnel, you're probably thinking, wow, that sounds awfully depressing. But the truth was, there was a day where I just woke up and everything just felt a bit lighter. And then there was another day where I woke up and it just felt a bit lighter, and another day and another day and another day and another day. And it just got better and better. And look, the truth is I still have days, especially when I'm due on my period, or, you know, I'm ovulating, where I'm sensitive, or I'm angry, or I'm frustrated. But rather than now try to buffer that or use something outside of me to feel things, I sit within and I look at what's coming up for me, and I ask questions like, what am I making this mean? Why do I feel unsafe today? What needs to be worked on? What do I need to work through? And I have the modalities and the tools to be able to work through that by myself now, because I've equipped myself over the last 3 years to do that. And I guess for me personally, and a couple of pieces of things that I say to every single client I ever do a discovery call with, is, number one, you'll only ever go where you're ready to go. So you can never be afraid that you'll re-traumatize yourself, because your nervous system and your unconscious mind will only go where it's ready. And number two, healing happens one layer at a time. I always use the analogy of the onion with my clients. I'm like, it's like one layer at a time. We start with the crispy bit, then the harder bit, then we get a bit deeper. And as we get deeper, it gets more emotional, right? It gets stronger. But often clients are really afraid there's something at the core. There's something they've suppressed, or there's something underneath. And for me personally, that wasn't my experience, and I can't speak for other people, but what I do know is you'll never go beyond where you're ready to go, because your nervous system won't let you. And so, you could also flip that and say the reason you have the life you have, the goals you have, the money you have, the business you have, is because your nervous system will only let you go as far as you are. So the biggest thing for me was the fact that this journey, although this was not the intention, has allowed me to clear so much of the past to make room for the future. It's allowed me to clear out old wounds, old narratives, old stories, old identities that have allowed me to grow my business exponentially, that have allowed me to receive more money than I could have imagined, to feel safer with that money, to feel safer in my business, to feel safe in my purpose. But more than anything, it led me to the creation of the program that is the Deep Healing Program, the Inner Transformation to Outer Manifestation Program Becoming, which is going to be open for launch on the 14th of February, the day of self-love. That program is everything that I know, everything I've learned, everything I've trained in, everything I've become qualified in, everything I've worked on with clients over the last 3 years. And it's getting a massive upgrade. So if you're already inside that program, you get all the upgrades for free. And it's also going to be available to be coached one-to-one working with me, because I just know how valuable it is when somebody sees you, when somebody hears you, when somebody knows and you can sense in their body that they know where you are. That in itself is healing, because it creates and holds the space for you to go on that journey and feel safe and feel seen without the people around you in your life who have no fucking clue, who are not relatable at all. It allows you to just go into that space and feel safe to heal and grow, because until we heal, until we clear the past, there's no room for a new future. And this is why we keep repeating cycles and we end up in the same situation year on year. And this is why my symptoms got worse, because I wasn't willing to look at what was coming up for me, and I kept pushing them down. And when I got really, really willing to go within, to look at the emotions, to look at the experiences, to look at the feelings, and to really get clear on who I wanted to be, what I wanted to have, that's when everything. And I became her. I became the person I am today, sat on the end of this microphone. So I wanted to share that story with you. Obviously, there's so much more I could tell you, and I'm going to be diving into kind of more details and some of the modalities I've used over the coming episodes. So make sure to stay tuned. So like, follow, subscribe. Let me know in the comments if this resonated. And if you are ready to become that next level version of yourself, to go on that healing journey, to move through that inner transformation, to create the life that you're actually desiring and dreaming of by clearing the past, healing from burnout, and processing all those old experiences that are holding you back like anchors, then you can find out more by going to lucysuperfox.com/becoming. And the program is going to be open for enrollment on the 14th of February. I'm also going to be doing a brand new Relaxed Transformation Masterclass, talking about polyvagal theory, talking about the nervous system, talking about the depths of healing. And you can sign up for that by going to lucysuperfox.com/relax. So I hope you love this as much as I love sharing it with you, and I cannot wait to see you on the next episode.